So, hi, Mira. We
Hi.
are back.
Woo! Finally, we're back for the final part in this epic trilogy.
We're going to talk about
Hereticus.
Hereticus. We are finally there. We're going to talk about the third part of the Ravener. She's not there yet. Although he is in everything. So the third part of the Eisenhorn trilogy, we've already done. Just so that everyone knows, we've already done Xenos. Then we had a little bit of a detour and did Pariah and Penitent right at the other end, which made a limited amount of sense. And then we came back and did Malleus, and now we're on Hereticus.
I'm so glad you took me on the detour to Bequin, because there's no way I would be happy if we'd just gone Malleus and then this.
Yeah, I mean, you're not happy with this book. Not with the writing of the book, but you aren't happy with what happens in this book.
Ian, I am absolutely distraught and distressed.
He's not the same guy.
No, I mean, we're going to go into it, but the skill of ABNETT, I wonder if he knew that this was that poor young officer's fate from the beginning, from Xenos. Do you reckon they knew? He must have known.
I mean, there's a running theme through everything to do with the Inquisition, that the plot of all of it is, basically your two routes are utter arsehole or using the warp to try and help and inevitably getting corrupted by it.
If I was an Inquisitor, I would just take the corruption as soon as it came along. Life seems easier, but all your friends will die.
So let's start. The thing I found really interesting about this book is when we were talking about Malleus, we talked about how it felt like a number of books squished into one plot and then hastily resolved at the end. This one has a much more traditional structure. Like, there is very clearly a beginning, a middle, and an end of this. There are three acts.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're much more delineated, and you get that feeling of the beginning tumbling into the middle, and then, the uplifting ending or downlifting. Yeah, depressing. I also think I've realized Dan ABNETT, we both agree Dan is amazing at world building. What I've realized is one of his strengths is he does like to show you, like, it's literally like, someone's holiday postcards. This is the volcano planet. This is the lovely pastoral planet, I find that really interesting. Throughout these books, I've pretty much had a tour of many planets in the Warhammer universe.
And in Act 2, that is very obvious.
Yeah. Yes. We're exhausted from all the whistle-stop touring we've been doing.
So should we get into it? Let's, we'll just go through this in the order of the plot, and we can talk about all the things that come up. And it'll be interesting because there's some things that I realized reading this that are constants in these novels that we've never talked about before. Characters that are just always there. So it'll be interesting now that we know that this is apparently the last one.
Apparently. We'll see. I think that's amazing. I, as always, have some fairly dumb basic questions about Warhammer and how it translates to the table and stuff. So I will interrupt you as we go.
Cool. Okay, here we go. So we open. I think I said to you before this, I really like the start of this book. I think it's really neatly done, and it gets our titular character, Eisenhorn, who is by this point a very well-respected, very powerful Inquisitor, gets him to a point of crisis pretty efficiently and builds on a lot of things that have happened in the last few books. So the book actually starts, before we get to Eisenhorn, the book actually starts with a load of coded messages that you see. And it's a message from Rorken that tells us lots. That Rorken, who is Eisenhorn's boss, is officiating a series of trials on a planet called Dura. And he's had to accept a young Inquisitor called Verviuk, who is a acolyte of Ozma's and incredibly obsessed with Eisenhorn. And he is, since Rorken has fallen ill and Eisenhorn is going to take over the duties, he's apologizing for Verviuk being there. We then get an incredibly funny message from Verviuk fawning over Eisenhorn, and a message back from Eisenhorn going something like, "Oh gods, why do you do this to me?"
I absolutely adored the character of Verviuk. I really related to that kind of open-eyed, enthusiastic, probably, I wonder if it's the same dynamic with us, Ian, where I'm like, oh my God, Ian, this is so exciting. Tell me about this. Can I come on your channel? And I really loved it because that was reflecting the excitement I had when I fell in love with Eisenhorn in the first book.
Yeah, but that does imply that I'm going to end up using the warp for my own ends.
I mean, if I could trust anyone in the warp, Ian, it would be you. famous last words. But I really loved that character. And I remember when I was reading it, I was like, this character is too nice for this universe. This character is going to die. And little did I know, something much worse would happen.
So we pick up the story with Eisenhorn in conference with a few other inquisitors and judging some pointless nobles on Dura. He's very bored there. We established that it's been like 150 years since Xenos, so 100 years since Malleus. He's got some new associates. We meet Cara Swole.
Best action hero name.
And she's like an acrobat. We meet a couple of other people. Bex Burgundy, I quite like.
Yes.
Who's like a gang fighter with face paint. And
also,
there's
a band based in Hackney, probably.
Probably a band. It's a good band name, isn't it? Bex Burgundy. Probably plays Pound. And we see Fishig again. There's this weird point where evidently they've had a load of rejuvenation. Betquin it's pointed out that Betquin has had Juvenat treatment, and although she's 150 years old, she still looks 30. Whereas Fishig presumably has had the same treatment, but is like old and jowly and going bald.
I know, interesting, isn't it? Love it. I mean, I'm glad that we get to see Betquin again in this kind of almost prequel to the major adventures, because we do not see a lot of her character in this novel. No. As you know, she's one of my faves. One of the points that I know you and I have discussed, Ian, is that Betquin is profoundly sad due to the unrequited relationship with her and Eisenhorn.
Yeah, and they mention that.
Yeah. And, you know, they make a really big deal in the books. Eisenhorn has this moment going, I adore her, she's amazing, but it just wouldn't work. She's a blank. Yet she can be his number one member of staff and create a distaff, and they can be working together every single day of their lives. And it just sounds like typical commitment issues to me, Ian. I don't know if that's personal.
There is this thing, right, that you're like, oh, so it's absolutely fine for her to be like in a carriage with you, in a car with you, but no closer.
No closer. Don't come and chat me up in my kitchen, and do not come into my bedroom. I just thought that was a really feeble kind of plot device, but fair enough, because now I don't know if I'd approve. If Betquin was my friend, I'd be like, babe, look at the red flags around Eisenhorn. Don't go near him.
Eisenhorn, we get a bit of background on what's been happening in the last 150 years. Not a lot. We'll get a bit more later. And the big thing that happens here, what we should understand is that it's boring as fuck. And so when someone comes to him and gives him a report that they have found a guy called Fade Thuring, plot takes a right turn. Fade Thuring is the person who killed, and we never see this, I think, maybe it's in a short story, but Fade Thuring is the person who killed Medea's father, Midas, who was the pilot in the first book. Yeah,
really old buddy, friend and ally of Eisenhorn, and we are led to believe they had loads of adventures across the galaxy. Mm-hmm. So the loss of this person has created eruption.
Eisenhorn drops everything. They found out that he's doing some evil work in the north of the continent, and they fly to an island in the north of the continent to confront him, where in short order there's some comedy scenes with like a priest who's been there tending to a church for 30 years. But the main point here is that it turns out Fade Thuring's got a chaos warlord titan that he's somehow managed to control. Eisenhorn, his little gang, their gun cutter, and the few inquisitors who came with him are totally out of their depth.
Yes. I mean, this is epic. Like, you don't see this down the Warhammer Club, but I've just been learning about Titans. If you want to play a Titan, apparently it costs around £1,000. If you bring one to the table, it's great because it can blast a lot of your enemy at one time. But you only get one turn, and if your enemy is scattered around the boards, can still take down a Titan. When we do this All Valleys tournament Warhammer, Ian, that you and I are building towards, I am going to take a Titan. So we need to borrow one. So, the other thing is, I discovered that some people have been kit bashing Necron Titans. So that is what I would like, please.
Okay then. Noted. Well, yes, so there's a Titan. Important thing, tell by the size, it's very big and powerful.
Scary AF, I think, actually, in these books. I was like, whoa, this isn't, we've had the whole thing where a whole city was destroyed, but we haven't come across this kind of monster that is like seemingly just kills everybody.
And it's a really 40k thing as well. It's the Titans are 40k's answer. They're one of 40k's answers to like the mecha anime genre. So the idea, and they've got a few books that are based around Titans, and they're really interesting because there's this idea that the Titan is such a powerful machine that it has like, there's this whole idea in 40k about machines having spirits or having AIs. They can't have real AI. So in order to do any thinking, they use modified human bits, brains and services and things.
Shit the bed. Are you and I going to read a book about a Titan with feelings?
We could do, but their feelings are always angry because they're made to be war machines.
Oh, okay.
And there's this idea that the best way to control a Titan is to directly link your mind with it. And then you have to try and control the damn thing and get it to do what you want. It's a very dark 40k way of doing, I'm piloting a giant robot.
I mean, that's one of the things I loved about this book. I learned about Titans and it inspired me enough to go and do some research on the internet about them. So I'm here for it.
This is a Chaos Warhound one. So it's like corrupted and it immediately goes to them. And basically it's irrelevant what it is. The point here is that everyone dies.
It's brutal.
In short order, they realize they're outclassed. A lot of people die. The Inquisitors that are with Eisenhorn die. The gun cutter is destroyed. Eisenhorn realizes that the only way to defeat this is to release...
We return to Glossia, the shittest code language in the world, in which they are trying to start. I'm going to say, Ian, I want you to go to the chapel, but I want to tell you in a manner that no one will decipher. I'm going to say, Ian, meet you at the worshipful place. I don't even need to say anything, viewers, do I? As part of containing this, before we go to the really bad thing, Eisenhorn has this fucking brilliant idea. You know what we're going to do? I've got a bit of warp magic to me now. And he thinks, if I connect me and a blank, we can blank out this Titan. Now, that sounds like a fucking stupid idea to me, Ian. I don't even play, and I know Psychic doesn't do... You can't, it's not like a car battery. Sorry, I'm getting really angry. So he says to Beckwin, hold my staff. And then he projects using this warp power and it throws Beckwin across the battlefield and she smacks into a wall and is basically paralyzed, down, out, close to death.
For the rest of the novel?
For the whole novel.
Yeah.
And I think you could read it as that was Eisenhorn's fault. It was a dumb idea. I don't think it was effective. I don't think it worked.
It sounded like a Star Trek idea, didn't it? It sounded like a reroute the nano thrusters through the dilithium crystals and then...
Exactly. So I was really, really shocked about that. And I was also shocked with how quickly that was dealt with.
So the whole thing is dealt with really fast. We're very obviously getting very fast to a place where Eisenhorn has to release Cherubael. That's what we're here for. So Eisenhorn releases Cherubael and loses a ton of other things. And Cherubael defeats the Titan, simple.
Yeah.
And then they find they have a second problem, which is now Cherubael's loose.
Cherubael does not want to be going back to prison.
He doesn't want to be stuck up someone again. And so he's angry now and he's going to kill everybody. And so Eisenhorn has to put the demon host into the nearest person that isn't dead, but also he doesn't care about. And that is the end of poor Bastian Verviuk. I
mean, it's just so freaking objectionable. And this character is written to be so cute, so innocent, so wholesome.
Really
so
annoying.
Pure. And I was thinking, you've let the demon go, just let it go away.
Like, he was going to kill him.
I know, but poor little boy, Bastian, whatever his name was, Verviuk. I care about him, obviously. So Eisenhorn does kill this poor innocent in order to house Cherubael's body. And he is noticed by one witness, which comes back to bite him in the arse. This is Eisenhorn's statement after it's all happened, and he's considering what's gone down. In my service to the God Emperor, I have always considered myself a dutiful and faithful soul, but it is strange how the everyday customs of worship become so easily neglected. During that voyage, having stumbled closer to the path of heresy than at any time in my life, wait and see, I felt ironically as if my faith was renewed. Perhaps it takes a glimpse over the lip of the abyss to truly appreciate the pure heavens above. I felt chastened and virtuous, as if I'd survived an ordeal and emerged a better man. Flipping out. I mean, you just killed an innocent and stuffed a demon in him. And you're like, oh, it's the right thing to do. And I got so angry at that passage. And I was like, this is so clever. Like, Dan is showing us how he's going into this very heretical, that's how he's justifying it. And I was like, oh, his mind is making excuses. And then I felt like, buckle up, Mira, because I could just tell.
It reminds me as well of something from right at the start of Xenos, which Xenos was obviously written to introduce you to the concept of Inquisitors. There's a line which he does, which sounds very grim and edgy when you read it, but it's very much like, well, I'm an Inquisitor and sometimes we have to do difficult things and not everyone could do them, but that's what being an Inquisitor is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more of the same. It's just the problem with that mindset is that then you give yourself license to go any amount of far.
I think it's interesting that we find out later that loads of the Inquisitors are really bad eggs. Yeah. They're all bastards.
This all wraps up and he seemingly just goes, right, fuck this, and leaves the trials. No one ever mentions what happens to those again. And he goes back home. So in the previous novel, he had moved out of Ocean House and he closed it and moved the estate to Gudrun. We finally see the estate of Gudrun. Gudrun, it's hard to explain Gudrun. Gudrun's like the 1920s. So he lives at like Downton Abbey.
He has stables.
He has, and I'll read this, he has an estate with ostlers and sommeliers. Sounds very fancy. They all line up, obviously, when he arrives. He puts Cherubael back in its box, or at least starts the preparations to put Cherubael back in its box. They have a nice dinner. They all return to their various rooms. We meet a few people we've seen before, the security guy, Kershaw.
There's one quite touching scene here where he realizes Medea misses her father and is on a vengeance trip. And he warns her against this. And he thinks, actually, if I can seance and show her a bit of the man that I knew and loved, this may calm her. So they are in a seance when, guess what, Ian? Guess what? He's got a house that's not very secure and it's overrun by assassins.
Again.
Like, I mean, really, whoever is supplying their security systems.
The entire house gets attacked. Even more of the characters we know are killed. He loses pretty much everything by an extremely precise attack, and he's forced to go on the run. There's a lovely little action sequence where they go and get an emergency flyer that they'd secreted in a little stable, a little hangar. They tail back to rescue Medea, who's been shot. There's a great quote here where he's shooting back at the Vesserine Janissaries, who are the people who've attacked them. And he picks up her auto pistol and he says it kicks like a yerf. Which is a made-up animal, just made up for kicking, presumably.
Oh, lovely. In the vein of Nerfs, which were made up for Star Wars.
Yeah, they rescue Medea. They do a bit of like action acrobatics with land speeders and tricking Janissaries and flying through. It's a bit of an action chase.
Did you enjoy that, Ian? I really loved that bit.
Yeah, it was quite nicely done, wasn't it? And it didn't. Yeah. It was a decently done, tense chase scene. And they end up in a situation where they've escaped with one flyer, with only Medea injured, Amos, and Elena Coy.
Yes.
Who is like a younger second of Bequin.
Yeah.
And seems quite like the down-to-earth character.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a time hop in my mind because we're back to Bequin when we meet her in Xenos, young, quiet, junior, like not even a proper member of the entourage. But yeah, we've kind of replaced Bequin, haven't we?
So I suppose what I feel is they've replaced Bequin with someone who can do Bequin's job but isn't going to be the love interest.
Yeah.
And that becomes apparent because this is kind of the end of Act 1 with them having lost everything and going on the run. We should point out that Fishig and a few other people, Karaswell, went off to do other things and Bequin had gone back to the distaff, which is in a different place now. So they go on the run. And that's kind of the end of Act 1. Eisenhorn has been established as being very powerful and he's lost everything. And then we enter Act 2, which entirely happens on Gudrun. It reminds me a bit of that Lith storyline from last time. This is mostly backstory.
Yeah, it is. We get a load of details that are filled in. I'll be honest, it pissed me off quite a lot because in the last book, do you remember we had these moments where Eisenhorn would just stop the story and go, oh, there was an amazing thing that happened and I hope you get to find out about it. He does the same thing this time. So this is where we learn that Eisenhorn kind of had like a pseudo wife, right?
Yeah, like they weren't married, but they were in a very long relationship for a very long time. We meet this person. He basically goes to hole out at the house of a doctor, a very famous doctor on the planet called Krezia Bashild. It is established that at some point in the last 100 years, they were partners. They had a relationship, quite a long relationship, and I think the reveal of this is, and the awkwardness they feel is quite nicely done. She's angry at him for not being there, sort of happy that he's back, angry that he's bought a tied up hostage and that someone's ill, angry that she's being involved in it. He's sad that he has to involve her because he's managed to get this far after 100 years without involving her in any of the inquisitorial stuff. But there's nice little touches, like he's still got some changes of clothes there that she's kept. And it's interesting how it's portrayed.
I agree with you. I think the exchanges between the two of them were really beautifully written, like people who have that kind of long relationship. And I really saw her as the cleric has joined the party. Very moralistic, is completely shocked that he's turned up on her doorstep with a bound prisoner.
She almost does the job of a point of view character. What's interesting is that this is someone who's a civilian on a relatively peaceful planet who's had no dealings with the Imperial military at all that Warhammer is so often about. And she's horrified at what he's planning to do and what he's willing to do. And it adds a lot of sense to the setting. And also it works very nicely as a point of view of finally, we've actually got a character in this who thinks a little bit like we might.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Did it not narc you a little bit that Bequin was taken out to be quite quickly replaced with another love interest? What were your thoughts on that?
I weirdly think the Crezia storyline is a lot more interesting than if Eisenhorn and Bequin had just got together in Xenos. I wonder if it was a bit of a late decision that originally Bequin would have been part of the party, and then maybe it was realised that not having Bequin there would mean you could explore that storyline more in a more interesting way. So then you have to keep the pariah, but you just replace Bequin with someone else.
I think you're right.
I don't know.
I mean, I did hate it because I'm a shipper, but actually, if we'd had Bequin along for this journey, we wouldn't have had the moral counterpoint, because Bequin and Eisenhorn are very, not that they're aligned, but she kind of does what he tells her to do, right?
Yeah.
So it could have been quite a dull, yeah. So I think you're right on that.
You would have lost that outside eye as well, because Bequin, by this point, would be absolutely fine with everything they do to the Janissary. Essentially, long story short, Medea is treated, but made stable, but not fixed. They have a bound Janissary. They try and interrogate him, and they get a few odd names and things, but he's got an implanted identity, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. They get the name of his boss, his immediate boss, like the leader of the Janissaries. But they don't get the name. They don't really find out a lot about the people in charge. They find out a name, Marla Teray,
the hiring manager, the personnel provider.
And eventually Crezia loosens his bonds and he escapes. So they all have to go on the run again. And we get another fun, tense running scene where they zoom around for a while, paranoid about being followed. As part of this, they send various messages, people like Fishig, to people off-world. They get some responses back from Nail, who is in one place, Harlon Nail, and from Fishig, who is elsewhere. One of those messages involves meeting at a place called New Dorsey, very far away. And apparently the only way to get there, despite having loads of flyers, the only way to get there is via the Space Orient Express.
And I love that we're keeping up the luxury feel of this third book. We've gone from Downton Abbey to the Orient Express. It's beautifully described. I think you and I would love a holiday on that train, Ian.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd love to eat, hold on a minute, potage velour, followed by a sirloin of lowland runker, roulade with a macédoine of herbs and forest mushrooms afriole, and a Chateau Zondier from Samotta that I remembered was a favourite of hers.
During this train journey, the train is attacked, and we find out these assassins that cleaned out his house, there's 800 of them, Ian. They were all hired, and they are all known as, like, if one was after you, you're dead. They are the deadliest mercenary force known to man. Of course, good old Eisenhorn has to get out of the train and fight them in sword combat on top of the train, which is, again, a very James Bondy kind of way. Let's talk about the swords, the description. This really, really made me laugh and angry.
So this is the sword from Malleus, though. This is the one he makes in Malleus.
Yes, the power sword. What
he had before was a power sword, which is a sword that is electrified in some way. And they're quite common in the game. Leaders would have them, like they can be ceremonial, but essentially they're a weapon, a sword or axe or a staff or whatever that's been in some way electrified. Eisenhorn's original one that he lost in Xenos was quite fun because it was basically the way they described it was like a lightsaber rather than an electrified sword. So anyway, that's a power sword.
Yeah.
What Eisenhorn crafts in Malleus that he gets Major Spure to make him on the Lith is what's called a force sword, which is a sword that's psychically resonant.
And if you had a model with a sword, what is the distinction? Is it just the painting, or do you have to say this unit has a force sword.
Usually, I mean, to be honest, a sword could be anything. Most people wouldn't bother delineating it. Usually, your paint power swords a weird color that isn't metal.
Love that. Mine would be
your power sword's gonna be blue or purple or pink or something. And force swords could be similar. Force swords often have like etching and runic wavy stuff on them.
You can see how like anything that potentially takes us D&D wise, I'm jumping on it. We're talking about swords. I can handle it. So the description, the sword measured nearly 1.5 meters in length and had been carried by the Swedish tribe of Cartha for 19 generations. After Arianhod was killed on Leaf 11 by a dark elder, Eisenhorn placed the sword in his personal safe, knowing he was duty-bound to return it to the tribal leaders on Carthay. We know those leaders ain't getting it back.
Ain't getting their sword back.
He's just using it to smash the shit out of everybody.
So he has this sword fight. I mean, to be fair, I don't think much happens. He finds the leader, Clansire Ettrick. I think he sort of deduces that one of the messages he gets is false. He does a bait and switch with the Glossier code words. He's like, oh, yeah, you remember that? Yeah, you remember that time we went to the two-faced frog planet? And the response comes back from now going, yeah, that was a laugh.
And Eisenhorn's like, we never went to that planet. We went to the two-faced goblin planet.
We reach, at this point, we get off we have a lovely time on the Space Orient Express. We find out a lot more about Eisenhorn and Crezia. Is getting a bit James Bond at this point. They sleep together again. They go for a lovely dinner. There's a lot of talk of what people are wearing in this book, especially in these sections. People are dressed in like very nice wool 3/4 length jackets and, you know, things like this. It's a lovely little distraction that fills you in on a bit more of life in the Imperium on some worlds. And at the end of this, like a few of these books, we suddenly crash headfirst into the third act where everything just piles up and resolves itself very fast. They get off the train at New Jevi, which is this city they've been led to, and they go to meet with apparently, I think it's Nail, apparently, in a bar. They know it's a trap. They know it's going to be a problem. You see it from the point of view of Eisenhorn walking into the bar, and then it turns out it was a particularly dastardly trick all along.
Yeah, so Eisenhorn has sent the body of one of the assassins to go and have the meeting, and then uses the psychic energy that he's using to puppet the body to explode the whole cafe, everybody in it, all the civilians and the innocent people. And thank you to Mobby123 and Knights of Blood affiliate on Reddit, who describes it as an Inquisitor creates a psychic suicide bomber and engages in some light terrorism.
Yeah.
I mean,
takes out the entire level of the hive.
Yes.
In order to kill Marla Teray, who turns out to be Pontius Glor's granddaughter.
Pontius Glor. And this is the person that was trapped in Malleus. And It was just a metal box. But for some reason, Eisenhorn has given them legs and arms. And
so if you remember at the end of Malleus, in order to find out how to defeat the Inquisitor Quixos, Eisenhorn goes originally to this mining station to meet up with a guy called Geard Bure, who's a Mechanicus engine seer. It turns out that that's where he left the Pontius Glor box, and Eisenhorn strikes a deal with him to basically tell him how to kill Quixos, and he'll tell Bure to give him like a servitor chassis so at least he can walk around a bit. But, you know, nothing big, couldn't escape from that. Well, turns out he can. So we find out that Pontius Glor is behind this, or at least the Pontius Glor line in some way. He uses the suicide bomb to kill Marla Teray. He wipes out an entire hive of people. And it's at this point that we really get to the slowly piling up tragedy of what Eisenhorn has become. After this lovely little ride where we realize what a human he was to start with, or maybe was 100 years ago, we then get to the bit where we realize what he's going to do now. And from this point on, this point is a watershed moment because Amos, Medea, and Fishig all are aware of what he does.
Yeah, this reminded me of the episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer called Tabula Rasa, where all the Scooby Gang, you know, Buffy, Xander, and Tara realize that Willow has been using her magic powers to make them forget things. And it's that awful moment when your loyal and trusted companions who would lay down their lives for you realize you're going bad and you're taking us with you. Once you've kind of puppeted a man and exploded him, taking out a whole level, I guess the secret's out. You're a heretic.
And he's still convinced that this is the right thing to do or the only thing to do. But yeah, this is the point we've got to with Eisenhorn. They follow this by being picked up by the Essene and Maxilla. And we get a few interesting scenes in the aftermath of this as they go away from Gudrun on the Essene, where Eisenhorn has to chat to Maxilla and Amos and Fishig. And you get three really interesting reactions. From Fischig, you get essentially an attempt to save Eisenhorn, which Eisenhorn considers to be idiotic and not worth helping at all, and gets into a massive argument, and Fischig storms off and leaves his service. So his oldest friend leaves. He gets into a conversation with Amos, where Amos basically says, look, I don't like it, but I get it. This is what you have to do.
You know, Amos, I'm reading him with the voice of Alan Bennett, and he learns about the codicium. They're talking about it, and he says, I don't want to touch it again. He said, I don't think I want to see it again. And I just hear this, just completely disillusioned, like, because he's really old as well, right, Amos?
Yeah, he's like 300 years old. Yeah, he served Eisenhorn's master when Eisenhorn was an interrogator.
And then Maxilla, for whom I have like a tribute
heart. Yes, Maxilla's this person that is a brilliant character that we've never talked about.
We really like him. I think he is a good-looking character. He's dashing. He's a bit Han Solo. He's a bit like the caster from Tron Legacy, played by Michael Sheen.
Well, he's got this weird mix of being like Maxilla is officially a trader, a local trader. He's given the title rogue trader, but whether he's a big fancy rogue trader or not, we don't know. He lives on a trading ship that does the same route all the time, and he's the only human aboard. Everyone else is a servitor, and he helps out Eisenhorn because it's interesting and daring to be off those routes and do something silly for sometimes. It's constantly pointed out he has been a criminal before, and he does things because he thinks they're fun, and he's not a moral person. He's usually the sort of rogue character to Eisenhorn's Puritan. He's portrayed as this really interesting mix of being a Han Solo-like rogue whilst also being like a periwigged Victorian dandy.
Well, he's flamboyant as fuck, isn't he? So, but you really liked the bit where he has a heart-to-heart, right? With Isaac.
Because he's like, weirdly, it's a nice switch around. So Fischig, who's usually the best friend, becomes the person who's telling Eisenhorn to completely change his ways.
Yes.
Amos is the supporter, and then Maxilla's the one who goes, well, this is what happens. Mm-hmm. This is what it takes. Sometimes you need to do the thing, and in order to do the thing, you need to do bad things. That's what I do all the time. Yeah. And has this really interesting heart-to-heart with him, which is really, really nice. I think it's a lovely switch around of how that group of friends works.
Yeah. So do we think Maxilla might be chaotic neutral? And we would probably say Fischig at this point is lawful good.
It's trying to be lawful good, yeah. So we plough into the third act, and after Fischig leaves, they go and see some other old friends. And like always, we end up meeting up with Ravener, who kind of, like he did in the last book, appears in Act 3, tells everyone what the plot actually is, and then tells them how to solve it.
Yeah, last time he turned up with, 38 magical seals. This time he turns up and he says, I've got this data, I've got this incredibly sophisticated scanning software.
He goes to do a psychic scan, and they basically image what the fuck's going on. Or you should also point out, Ravener at this point is buddies with the Eldar, and we see a little bit of everyone's response to the Eldar.
I mean, this is really interesting because we haven't come across Eldar in these books before.
We haven't come across any of the normal aliens that you would get in 40k.
No. So if you're playing the game, if you're playing Eldar, you are chaos. You are anti-imperial.
You're anti-imperial, but there's your part. So in 40k, there's generally all the factions split into three: Imperial, Chaos, or Xenos, which is the aliens. The Eldar are elves.
Yay!
The Eldar they're your elf race. Like originally 40k was a port of Warhammer Fantasy to space. The Eldar are your elves. They're your old dying race who used to be the masters of the galaxy and are incredibly knowledgeable, but also very arrogant and only care about themselves.
But if I'm in the Imperium on their salary and I'm hanging out with Eldar, that's awful, right?
Yeah, because the Imperium considers fraternizing with Xenos to be exactly as bad as fraternizing with demons.
Right. So not only is Eisenhorn a heretic, Ravener is a heretic.
Yeah. Everyone in 40k is bad, but there are times when the interests of the Eldar and the Imperium align.
Interesting.
So this isn't completely without precedent. And the way it's portrayed is very much like the Eldar have realized that if this thing happens, chaos will grow in power and kill some Eldar. Therefore, they've convinced the humans to go and solve it for them.
Excellent.
But the point there is that they don't give a shit about any of the humans.
How popular are Eldar on the tables?
reasonably, I'd say. Like, they've been around forever. They're reasonably popular in the same way that elves are quite popular playing Dungeons and Dragons amongst some people. And lots of other people in Dungeons and Dragons would never play an elf.
I have a question. How did the Eldar survive and do so well on the tabletops, yet squats, which are their dwarven equivalent?
Dwarves.
How is that?
They just they got rid of them. I think, to be honest, the official line was that when they did Eldar, they actually wrote quite an interesting culture. They went into like Celtic mythos, and like they've given them quite an interesting set of gods. They really expanded them. And with squats, they sort of went down this comedy route. And at some point in the 90s, 40K took a turn towards not being as comedy. And that's when the squats got dropped. The squats were like, their 40K incarnation was Hell's Angel bikers and also engineers. So they got dropped.
Thank you. I love learning these little nuggets, as you know. And that's so funny how you find that across, even if you watch Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, those Peter Jackson movies, elves, everything you could want to be, the pinnacle of humanity we could not reach. Dwarfs, lol, and they sing a lot.
Yeah. Using the enhanced powers of the Eldar, they find out where Pontius Glor is, and they realize it's this guy called Kanjar the Sharp, who has been tailing them for a while, took out all of Eisenhorn's operation, and that Kanjar the Sharp is actually Pontius Glor in like a super bladey death servitor body. And that he, along with some rogue traders, as always, some bad rogue traders, is looking for a thing called the bark of a demon called Isaril, which is meant to be an ancient demon ship weapon thing. And it's on a planet called Ghoul. All of this we just get told. Ravena's like, yeah, found all this out. This is the plot now. And after this, we realize, what's important about if this ship's woken up? And the Farseer says, well, I can't see the future after that because there is no future left to see.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We learn about this super powerful universe destroying ship, which begs the question, if this is what Pontius Glor is after, why is he sidelining getting his daughter to go and book 800 assassins? And it's just so, if you're going to destroy the universe anyway, just pick up the big ship.
I think we find, exactly. I think we find the argument is originally that the reason he gets his daughter to go and do all the assassins and kill Eisenhorn's whole operation is because Eisenhorn's the only one who knows he's still alive, because Eisenhorn hid that Pontius Glor was alive from the Inquisition. So no one knows that Pontius Glor is a threat except Eisenhorn.
That makes a lot of sense.
So that's what he's doing, trying to get rid of Eisenhorn. Anyway, we basically get told all this in Act 3 by Ravena, who swoops in to tell everyone the plot again. They do their scene with Ravena, they get their gang back together, and they go off with the Eldar to go to Ghoul and stop this. So one of the last things that happens, which becomes important, is that in order to find out more about this demon planet, Eisenhorn has to give Amos Malus Codicium.
Yeah.
So then we go onwards. The ship gets waylaid at a waypoint. They stop to refuel or something. It turns out that Medea has been talking to Fischig. Fischig's been trying to meet up to say sorry and get back into the Eisenhorn's good graces. But when they do that, it turns out it's a trap. And Fischig has brought along Ozma and Haldane, the two evil inquisitors from the first books, who then capture the entire gang, take over the Essene, and they kill Maxilla.
I've got the little death scene here, and Eisenhorn says, I went over to Maxilla, his eyes flickered and he looked up at me. I didn't mean it, he said in a tiny voice. Mean what? I told that brute none of you meant anything to me, but I didn't mean it. I know. Thank you, he said and died.
Oh, yeah. So we lose even more of our characters.
Yeah.
We end up in this very tense scene where inevitably the only thing that can save them is Cherubael. And it turns out the person who releases Cherubael is not Eisenhorn, because Amos, who has a photographic memory, has of course now memorized the entire Malus Codicium and releases Cherubael, which then is the Deus Ex Machina and ends it. Of course, Cherubael then goes crazy again, threatens to kill everyone. In this, Fischig is shot. In this, Eisenhorn is shot in the knees.
Yep.
And the final thing that happens as Cherubael comes to them is that Amos speaks the words of possession and finds the nearest warm body to put the demon in. And we think at this point that is Amos, as the light of Amos leaves his eyes. Blackout. We open 3 weeks later on the final action scene.
Yeah, I have to be honest, my brain was blown by this time. There was a lot going on. And once again, like, we're here now.
Yeah.
So there's the whole ending, everything again is here.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happens. I'm reading it. I'm not taking it in. I'm traumatized. Who else is going to die? And what I love about these book clubs is that Ian always explains what actually happened at the end. So go ahead.
So this is what actually. So as you said, it's a really quick wrap up. I think that's because the entire arc of Eisenhorn is now over. We've done. If the story is what happens to this Inquisitor, well, you know what happens to him now, and now it kind of feels like wrapping up. So in short order, we open on the planet of Ghoul. Everyone's invading. The Eldar are helping. Ravenous gangs are helping. There's a load of teams of people invading this planet. We find out that the planet is basically an etched planet, planed clean and then etched. And it's like a giant maze of valleys. And they keep getting attacked by people popping out the valleys. We find out that Cherubael was in fact put in Fishig's body. And that Eisenhorn has made him now safe enough for Cherubael to be around a lot more. Like that demon host can be used and controlled. Cherubael is meant to be much less powerful in this form, but is now a usable tool that Eisenhorn is openly using to help. And interestingly, that's the Cherubael we meet in Penitence and Pariah, is the one which is a loyal servant and just a bit sarky. And they get attacked constantly from people coming out the walls. It takes them a while to figure out how to get through the walls and into the inner sanctum. They find their way to the temple of this demon Isariel, which is like a James Bond scene. Essentially, there's a load of architects and workers exposing the temple, and they're all on like lifty platforms, and they have to do a fight up the lifty platforms to get to the top. Eisenhorn is stomping around. He's had to fit some augmetic bracing to his legs because they didn't have time to fix his gunshot wounds properly. And they say that like you're going to be stuck in these for ages because you're never going to heal properly if you do this. But he does it with his stompy legs and his big sword. He fights Kanjar the Sharp and inevitably wins after some peril. And that's it. That's the plot. And it kind of wraps up there. There's a nice little epilogue where we find out what happened to everybody. Nail bought a beaver farm on Coruscant. Cara Swole disappeared off, and we never hear from Eisenhorn again. And that's the book. That's the trilogy.
I mean, what a ride. So, I mean, what's really interesting is I really enjoyed the Cherubael that showed up in Pariah and Penitent. So, the character journey and understanding how he's trapped and becomes this different kind of being is interesting. And thank God that they found a way to resurrect the character of Beckwin, really, because otherwise, had this book ended like that, that would have been it. She was slammed into a wall, knocked out, paralyzed. And I just think she was a great character. So,
and she does pop up a bit more, but it'll be interesting to see your take on her when we go through the next ones. It's obviously a very long arc, and it's an exposition of what is inevitably going to happen to characters in 40K, that no matter their intentions, however Puritan they start off at, however well-intentioned they start off, they're going to end up as this guy, half a robot because that was the quickest thing. All of his friends are dead, and he's using warp magic openly now with demon hosts that he doesn't bother to hide.
Yeah, so a happy ending in the Imperium is just you go back and you follow some more rules, and the Golden Emperor is quite happy. So when you look at all the different elements that we've seen across these books, the Inquisitors, even with all their warships hustling, without these kind of forays into chaos and warp and like magics, they kind of wouldn't have got anywhere.
It's a very 40K story. Pyrrhic victories, that's how 40K works. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. So I think you learn a lot in these books. I think if you're coming to them as someone new to 40K, you do get through a fair amount of the setting and the background. So it'll be interesting what we think we should do next. There's a few ways we could go with this. So we could continue through the series, which I think we should probably do. The next thing to go into is Ravenous. There's a trilogy of Ravenous books, which are, again, similar thing. They're not first person. They're a bit more of an ensemble cast, and they're a very different feel to Eisenhorn.
Right.
And then from that, I think there's the Magus, which I haven't read, which is a collection of short stories and a new novella. And then we get to Pariah and Penitent, and we're up to speed. But there's also the option that we don't do that straight away and maybe have a bit of a palate cleanser in between.
Yeah, we could do that, couldn't we? I mean, I'm very up for understanding and learning more about Ravenous because he's such a mysterious, like you said, he provides so much plot and power. My question is, So does like Eisenhorn get a book and then Ravener's first book is concurrent?
No, set afterwards.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Ravener picks up from where this leaves off.
Okay, well, listen, I would be happy to either go straight onto Ravener or have a palate cleanser of your choice or read a Titan book.
Now you said that, I've got two options for palate cleansers. One of them is a book that has been mentioned a couple of times in the comments, I think because we might have mentioned it at some point, and it's For the Emperor, which is the first of the Caiaphas Cain novels. And they are probably the closest thing Warhammer has to a comedy.
Okay, that sounds fun.
That's one thing. They're set in, it's a military engagement, they're set in a war zone, but they're kind of pastiches. Have you ever read a Flashman book? Have you ever heard of Flashman?
Yes,
right?
yes.
So they're kind of pastiches of that.
Okay, and what was the other option?
And then the second option for palate cleanser is we could pick, there's a very good Dan Abnett book called Titanicus, which is a big, thick, many points of view war novel set about Titans, but it's written by Dan Abnett. And it does the other thing I think Dan Abnett's famous for. One of them is these gazetteer behind the scenes Eisenhorn-like novels. And the other thing I tend to associate Dan Abnett with is these novels about an event from 50 different people's perspective.
Okay.
Our options at this point are start with Ravener. I think Titanicus would be a good option if you want to learn more about Titans. That is a proper serious Warhammer 40k war book.
Okay.
And the third one would be For the Emperor, which is a very tongue-in-cheek, sillier look at 40k.
Well, I think we should use that polling option on your YouTube channel.
Well, I think officially now I have to use it on my Patreon page. So okay. I've got a Patreon page. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yay! Finally,
I've got a Patreon page. Yeah, I did it. I did it when I posted a video a few weeks ago looking into 28 Mag female Space Marine things. So you're an editor at 28 Mag?
So yeah, 28 Mag is a brilliant, beautiful hobbyist magazine. So artists write about their minis and it's just fantastic. And it's really helping me learn loads about Warhammer and its universe. I
did a video about their female Space Marine challenge. That went about as well as you can expect. We had lots and lots of lovely comments and, hundreds of comments by arseholes. And that's how these things go. And at that point I was like, yeah, maybe this is getting a bit of traction. Maybe I'll start a Patreon. I started a Patreon. A Patreon, if you want to really work it, then it's a job. I don't have time to do that. So I started one, which is essentially, the deal is it's £2 a month. There's only one level. The only perk is that I'll ask those sort of questions there. I think it'd be a really good idea to put it on the Patreon because we do want those people who enjoy female miniature 28 challenge to be the ones that vote. So say all the people that really didn't like women in games had an opinion, then we'd be reading the book they wanted us to read. Yes, good point. Let's go to the Patreon where people who hopefully like you will be there. Yeah, I mean, if you really hated everything I do in Warhammer World and all of my opinions, probably not going to be paying me £2 a month to keep spouting them, are you? Probably not voting on what books we should read, but just in case they are. Yeah. What we'll do after this, we've finished our first trilogy. That's you all the way through an Eisenhorn trilogy, first 140k trilogy. Yay. And we will put up for poll what we're going to do next. And hopefully in a week or two, we'll start the next book. Thank you, Mira, for sticking with me for the whole trilogy. And I'll see you next time. Cool. Bye. Bye.